the pre-trip inspection for the front of the bus. We're going to get started on it. First thing is we want to look under the bus and make sure there's no puddles or drips coming from the underside, and also that it's sitting level. Next thing, we're going to check all our lights. And so we're going to name all our lights and tell what could possibly be wrong with them. We've got our clearance lights, our amber warning lights, our red loading lights, turn signals and hazards as well down here, our low and high beam headlights, and also on this particular bus, we have reflectors right on the inside. Don't forget to name the reflectors. The things we'll look for on the lights are, want to make sure they're not, the lenses are the proper color, they're not broken, cracked, or damaged, and they're clean as well. Okay, next, we're going to look at our mirrors. These are our crossover mirrors right here. We're going to name our mirrors. This crossover. These right here are our side view mirrors, and these are our convex mirrors. Things that we look for on them are, we want to make sure there's no missing bolts or parts, they're securely fastened, and it is clean and the fittings are tight. Next, we're going to look at our windshield up here. We want to make sure that there's no cracks, there's no illegal stickers, and it's clean as well. Our windshield wipers right down there below is going to be, we want to make sure the rubber is not torn and there's no damage to them, and there no missing bolts or parts. Next, we're going to start on our engine compartment. So I will open the hood. The other side's unlatched already. The front of the bus includes everything from the door up this way. So first, we're going to start with the suspension parts down here, and we'll look at our washer fluid for one thing and make sure that it is adequately level. And we are going to look at our shock absorber, which is right here. And we want to make sure that there's no damage to it. It's not bent or dinged up, and it's securely fastened top or bottom, and there's no loose or missing parts. Next, we're going to look at our leaf springs, which are right here, and we want to make sure that those are not shifted or damaged or missing, anything like that, and they're also securely fastened front and back here. Okay. Next, we're going to look at our spring mounts, which this is the rear spring mount right here, and the front spring mount is up here on the front side. And we want to make sure there's no missing bolts or parts. They're securely fastened to both the frame and to the spring as well, and no damage. Next, we'll look at our U-bolts, which are right here and right here. We want to make sure that they're not damaged or broken, and also the nuts are tight on the bottom there. Next, we're going to look at our brake lines, which is this line right here. We want to make sure that they're not leaking, that there's no damage to them, there's no cuts, there's no bulges, and also that the fittings at the ends of them are secure. Next, we will look at our brakes, and we will tell the examiner whether they're disc or drum brakes, and this one is a disc brake, so we would tell him that we would look at the pad, make sure it's not dangerously thin, and there's no oil on it, and there's no cracks. Next, we would tell him this is because it's a disc brake, that we have a rotor on here, and some buses there's an inspection plate, and you can see it, and if you can, then you want to make sure that there's no oil on it and it's not cracked. Next, we would make sure that I guess while we're here, we'll go ahead and back out and we'll talk about our tires. Our tires, we want to make sure that the tread depth's at least 4/32 and there's even wear on them. Also on our tires, we want to make sure that on the sidewalls, on the inside and outside, that there's no cuts or bulges or no damage to the sidewalls. Lastly, on our tires, we want to make sure that they have the proper inflation. And the way I would check that is to take the cap off, use the tire gauge, check the inflation, and make sure it matches manufacturer specs, or 80 to 120 pounds. Our wheel, while we're here, is we want to make sure that there's no damage to our wheel, that there's no illegal welds or cracks. Next, we'll look at our lug nuts, which are right here. Want to make sure they're all in place. They're all tight, and there's no shiny threads or rust trails, or no cracks where the hole is at. And next, we will look at our hub oil seal right here. We'll make sure there's no spray pattern, that all the bolts are securely fastened, they're tight. And also, if we had an inspection plate, we would look to make sure the oil level is adequate on that. Okay, moving on from there, we will go to our engine, and the three things that we're going to be looking for, the three main things other than the fluid levels, is going to be the alternator, the water pump, and the power steering pump, since this is not an air brakes bus. Our alternator on this bus, be sure you check with your bus mechanic to make sure that you know exactly where all these items are. But on this particular bus, it's back behind this plate right here. And you can see the back side of it, and you would want to point that to the examiner and tell him that it is a belt-driven alternator. Also on the alternator, we want to make sure that our connections are tight, there's no missing bolts or parts, and it's securely fastened. Our water pump now is difficult to see, but it is going to be right here, and it's going to be belt driven. We can see the belt right here, and also we want to make sure that the belt is no more than 3/4 of an inch of play, whether it's the water pump or the alternator. Also on the water pump, we want to make sure it's securely fastened, no missing bolts or parts, and it's not leaking. Next, we're going to move over to the other side of the bus and finish up on the other side. Next, we're going to talk about our power steering pump. And on this bus, the power steering pump is gear driven, and it's back there toward the back. So you'll have to ask your bus mechanic just to make sure you know where it's at and how it is. On it, we want to make sure that it's securely fastened. There's no missing bolts or parts, and it's not leaking. Now, if you're not sure about where your power steering pump, you can tell the examiner as well that you can follow the hoses from our reservoir, our power steering pump reservoir, which is right here. We can follow our hoses back to the power steering pump back here. And we also want to make sure that our hoses are not leaking. This is the reservoir for the power steering pump. We want to make sure that is securely fastened, no missing bolts or parts, and that the level is between add and full, at least above the cold line right here. Next on our fluids, we're going to talk about our coolant, and that's right here on this bus. And we want to make sure that the coolant level is between add and full on here. Also, we will make sure that there's no leaks. This is the hose right here for the coolant, as well as for the water pump. We can see better over here. We want to make sure that we tell the examiner that the hoses are securely fastened, the connections are tight, and it's not leaking. There's one here, and there's one on the bottom as well that you can't see from this side. Next, we need to talk about this is our master cylinder for our brakes right here. And we want to make sure that it's securely fastened. There's no missing bolts or parts, not loose. And also on our level, we want to check our reservoir for our brakes and make sure it's between add and full, or min and max. All right. Next, we are going to, now we would check this side as far as the suspension parts go, the same as we did the other side, but now we're going to add our steering components. So this is our steering gearbox right here. We want to make sure that there's no missing parts. It's securely fastened. And we want to check our steering linkage going from our steering wheel down to the steering gearbox. And we want to check the steering linkage as well from the steering gearbox over to our axle right here. And what we want to check on that is to make sure that all of our U-joints are secure. There's no missing bolts or parts. Nothing's bent or damaged. And it's secure. Okay. Also, we want to check on that. We want to make sure that our hoses that go from the steering gearbox are not leaking, and the connections on the clamps are secure as well. Next, we are going to go to our fuse panel right here. which on this bus, we're going to tell the examiner that this is a circuit breaker bus, and I can tell that because it's got the little buttons where the fuses normally are. However, this bus also has a few extra fuses on this panel, so the extra fuses for it are in the glove box inside the bus. And lastly, for the front of the bus, we want to talk about the stop sign here. We want to make sure that no missing bolts or parts, everything's securely fastened. The lenses on here are the proper color, and the wiring connections are securely tight. And that's it for the front of the bus.